your manager is a gatekeeper. They can help you grow in your career, move up, develop, succeed. And if you don't have someone to be in your corner and help you do those things, there really isn't a future for you at the company. And so you leave. So bosses and direct supervisors particularly make the world of difference for someone's experience on the job.
Welcome to Steel City Growth. I'm your host, Bill Ildenfritz. Each week, we'll explore the passions, expertise, and experiences of business owners and founders in the greater Pittsburgh area. Steel City Growth is proudly sponsored by Murphy Business of Pittsburgh, committed to providing exceptional services to meet all your business needs. Let's dive in. Good morning. Very excited to talk to my next guest. She has tons and tons of information I think you'll love to hear. Her career has spanned various activities, such as teaching, practicing organizational psychology, optimized learning and development, and starting her own consulting company. She is a proponent for workplace inclusion and allyship, which led her to authoring her upcoming book, Ally Up: Act Like an Ally, Work with an Ally. She is the chair of Electronic Communications Committee for the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, CEO and founder of Mattingly Solutions. Dr. Victoria Mattingly, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. There's a lot of stuff I think we can go over today to really help employees and business owners, so I'm really excited. The first question we always ask is this: what is the number one most important strategy for growing your business?
I think it really comes down to people. So taking care of your people, hiring the right people once they get there, making them feel valued, respected, seen, and heard. But you really can't grow your business as a solopreneur. It's really difficult. There's only so many hours in the day. And so building a team and taking really good care of that team is critical to business development.
I do agree. People are very, very important. I have a whole bunch of follow-up questions, so I'll kind of move on to something a little different. Now we talked about growing externally a little bit. What are some of these ways that you can take care of your people internally?
Yeah, so I do a lot of work on workplace inclusion. I've been studying it and practicing it for about a decade now. And I define inclusion as the behaviors that result in others feeling valued, respected, seen, and heard. And so the trick to it is that what makes Bill feel valued, respected, seen, and heard might look very different than what makes Victoria feel valued, respected, seen, and heard. And so you really have to get to know your people on an individual basis and make sure the way you're communicating with them, you're recognizing them, you're coaching them, you're developing them is a way that they are receptive to, that they appreciate, that resonates with them. And so it's what you do. Inclusion is what you do. Allyship is a certain type of inclusion. I'm sure we'll get into that here shortly. But really, behaving in such a way that those around you feel valued, respected, seen, and heard.
Yeah, how do you do that? How do you, like you said, I might have one personality versus yours. How do you get to know that, and how do you work with that as a business owner?
Yeah, so curiosity is your best friend. So coming into every conversation, not with preconceived notions, right? Coming in with a true sense of curiosity. So what communication style works best with you? Or how do you like to be recognized? What makes you feel valued on this team? How can I make sure your voice is being heard? Something that's really basic but really effective is thinking about meetings and how meetings are run. It's far more effective for your team, especially with different personalities, different preferences, if you send out a meeting agenda before the meeting starts so people can know what to expect. They can come in with those ideas and questions and feedback cooking, and then sending out a follow-up after the meeting of here's our agreed upon next steps, or reach out if you have any additional feedback or questions, because some people might not want to respond right in the moment. They want to have some time to think things through, respond afterwards. And so it's really thinking about how can I make sure the way I'm communicating, the way I'm interacting with others is as inclusive as possible.
I love that. And I will tell you one thing as a nursing home administrator, what used to drive me a little bit crazy is you do have that meeting time, say 9 o'clock, and people roll in at all different times. And the reason it really bothered me was not because people were late. It was more about, I think everybody's important. And when I asked them, hey, Victoria, tell me about your department, I think the whole team should hear about Victoria's department. So how do you address that, the lateness, and how do you kind of get them all in the same time and stuff like that?
So people learn not by being told what to do, but by watching what others do. And so as a leader, to be able to say, I always show up on time. I respect you and your time and your calendar by showing up whenever we agreed upon showing up. And so I expect just the same from you all. So if you're a leader and you're not showing up to meetings and you're showing up late, then you can't have that same you can't have different expectations for your people. So being that role model and then using that in conversations to correct that behavior and say, hey, I'm doing this for you, so you really got to do it for me too.
Yeah, I love that advice. I love that advice. I really do. What's one toxic workplace habit that most leaders don't realize they're encouraging?
Think overworking, especially in the day of AI and technology, there really shouldn't be any reason any employee should be working more than 40 hours a week. Now, there's always exceptions, maybe like doctors or nurses, or, there's always exceptions to the rule. Maybe a big launch is coming up, if it's all hands in, but in general, and this is coming from my background as an organizational psychologist, we really shouldn't be working more than 40 hours a week. And a lot of research shows actually a 4-day work week is even better for productivity, giving us 3 days to recover on the weekend and be able to replenish and refuel our cognitive resources. And so, as a manager, as a leader, making sure that your people are not overworked, because overworking is going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to poor performance, is going to lead to bad customer service. And so making sure we're really keeping an eye on the hours our employees are working and course correcting to make sure we're not burning our people out.
Yes, perfect. About burnout leads me to my next question. How do you actually measure if your team is actually burned out and not just tired?
Yeah, so there are measures, validated measures of burnout from the organizational psychology literature. Shafuli is a big burnout researcher, and they're pretty short measures. They're not super long. So you could anonymously have your team complete that measure using just a Google form, and then seeing, averaging the scores and like where do we fall on this level of burnout to make sure that we're not getting into danger zone, right? And really differentiating it, as you said, from not just being tired, right? But like really getting your resources drained from the job.
Yeah, I like that. Good advice. So here's a question. There are people, we'll say older, or maybe I'll say old school. I don't want to say older people, old school, that will say, yeah, look, when I was younger or when I was first started out, I worked 60, 70, 80 hours. That's what you do. How do you respond to that?
So I'm a millennial and I have definitely fell victim to overworking and burnout. My last corporate job, I completely burnt out at. So, and I feel like I call that out because as a millennial, I was raised by those who have that, old school traditional mentality, right? So I fell victim to it. Gen Z is not putting up with that. They really, really value work life balance, taking care of oneself, setting boundaries, self care. And so it's going to be a way of the past. And those who have this kind of old school mentality that, I work 60, 80 hours a week, so you have to too, they're not going to be able to retain these younger generations. They're going to be losing talent. They're not going to be able to recruit top talent. People are definitely, especially younger generations, they're choosing organizations that align with their values, even above and beyond pay. They're willing to take a pay cut because they have an organization that they know has the same values, will have their back, and will let them take care of themselves as full humans.
Yeah, I think that transitions perfectly into like culture. So, how can business owners tell if their company has a culture problem?
really comes down to employee voice and talking to your people. And in this case, culture usually starts at the top. Leaders are responsible for creating workplace culture. And so to get that feedback from employees to really understand that employee voice, I would recommend bringing in an external resource, an external consultant, and doing a cultural assessment. So surveying the employees, having focus groups, really understanding what that employee experience is like, asking questions specific to the culture, and learning from the people on the ground itself. I think a lot of times leaders are disillusioned because they're in their boardrooms, they're surrounded by their cronies, right? And they think everything's just fine, but they don't actually explore what's going on within the organization to learn what's actually happening with the culture itself.
How do high performing companies handle conflict differently than the average one?
Not sweeping it under the rug. So successful companies have a culture of psychological safety. And what that means is that people feel safe to bring up their opinions, their perspectives, maybe, counter arguments, or in case of conflict, being able to say, hey, like, this is an issue, let's address it. The companies that sweep conflict under the rug, that don't have confrontation, things start brewing, there starts being resentment, it then becomes a cultural issue, becomes a retention issue. And so companies that handle conflict well have these strong cultures of psychological safety. They're safe for people to speak up and share their concerns, and the willingness to address them and move forward. When I worked at Amazon, one of their core principles was to disagree and then agree on what the solution is and move on. Like we're gonna bring this up, we're gonna solve it, and we're gonna move on. Even if it doesn't solve it for the side of the coin that I was, going for, right? But we agreed, we brought it up, and now we're gonna move on to the next thing. We're not gonna stay stuck on particular problems or conflicts.
I really love that. Tell me a little more about that because I'm intrigued. There are a lot of people that keep going over and over and over the same problem. So how can you put that in your organization? I think that's great.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Amazon had it as part of their key leadership principles. So, and people really lived by those, at least when I was there back in 2016. And so, if a conflict does arise in a meeting and people are going at it, one of them or someone else in the meeting can say, "Hey, like we we subscribe to this belief that we're going to address conflict and then move on. So we're not going to stay on this topic." So really embedding it into the values, into the leadership principles of the organization and calling upon it when that's necessary. So organizations that don't have espoused and regularly, talked about values aren't able to actually leverage those values in times where they're most important. And that was not the case at Amazon.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. But agree, leadership is very important. What's the difference between motivation and manipulation in leadership?
Manipulation is whenever you're not fully sharing the whole story, right? You're not being transparent. You're trying to control a situation. You're misleading, decepting the other person. Whereas motivation, that's almost like a teamwork exercise, right? So manipulation is I'm trying to make you do this thing. Whereas motivation is I work with you to find out, what are you motivated by? Is it external rewards like pay or bonuses or recognition? Is it internal rewards where you feel like the work that you're doing has value and meaning and purpose? And it's learning what motivates you and then pulling those levers in a really transparent and collaborative way.
I like that. I used to oversee sometimes 300 employees, or in Amazon, or have all these employees. How do we kind of learn as leaders, really what motivates the majority of the employees?
It goes back to what I said earlier about inclusion. Everyone's recipe for motivation is going to look a little different. And so, as a leader, it truly is your responsibility to get to know your people. And this doesn't have to be a complicated process. We're going to do a 15-minute one on one where I want to learn about what motivates you to do good work here so I can be sure to access that. And then documenting, right? So if I had a ton of employees, I would have a spreadsheet and have the, important facts, how this person's motivated, how they like to be recognized. So I can quickly access that. So whenever it's time to, as I said, pull those levers, you know what levers to pull.
Yeah, I like that. What are some of the questions that you would ask?
As I said, it can be really simple. Like, what motivates you to come into work every day? What excites you about this job? How do you like to be recognized? What's something that you want to dig more into? What's your passion here? So yes, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just how do you get them talking about what makes them feel valued at the organization?
No, I think that's great. I love the Excel spreadsheet and putting it all together very organized. I love that. I'll have to remember that for sure down the road. Do people really leave bad managers, not bad jobs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll go back to my experience at Amazon. I had one of the best leaders I've ever had from a corporate standpoint at Amazon. My team was made up of mostly all organizational psychologists, so people who study work-life balance and burnout and motivation and all these things. And I had an amazing experience there. If it wasn't for me wanting to finish my PhD, I would have stayed there and never left because I had such an amazing boss. But then you compare that to, some of the reports and, news articles that come out about Amazon, and people have not had that experience there. So it's not the organization, it's your boss, it's your team. Your manager is a gatekeeper. They can help you grow in your career, move up, develop, succeed. And if you don't have someone to be in your corner and help you do those things, there really isn't a future for you at the company, and so you leave. So bosses and direct supervisors particularly make the world of difference for someone's experience on the job.
Yeah, it's I find it interesting because, like you said, might look at the reviews for Amazon and they could be bad, but you're right. You might have some key managers in there that make their employees feel very valued and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
you have to look at departments, not just the company in general. So that's great advice. What do CEOs misunderstand most about employee engagement?
So employee engagement at most organizations, especially mid-sized to large organizations, is measured usually on an annual basis. And you get the results and you get, your trends, are you doing better or worse than last year? You do better or worse than competitors in your industry? And then maybe there's some action planning that follows after that. But then it just dies. Then it just goes away until that next year of that measurement cycle kicking back in. So engagement should not be an annual consideration. It should be a daily activity. So really making sure that your employees, know what they're doing, have the resources to do what they're doing, feel motivated and inspired by their work. That should be an all year exercise, not a once a year measurement exercise.
What do you recommend? I mean, to kind of keep it going. I mean, I know you said kind of keep training, but what other things you may recommend to keep it going all year?
So when it comes to that action planning phase after the results are found, keeping those top of the mind, you making that maybe a small cultural or teamwork exercise at your weekly team meetings, right? Having those key, honestly, it should be 2 or 3 action items that we really should take from an engagement survey. When you have a list of 10 or 20, they're never going to be accomplished. And so what are those 2 to 3 action items? I'm putting it on a sticky note on my monitor, and as a leader, I'm going to make sure I touch upon those areas whenever I have my one-on-ones, when I have my team meetings, not letting it get put on the back burner, but really keeping it front and forefront, in conversations and meetings to make sure that we're actually actioning that action plan and not just writing it and then forgetting about it.
Yeah, love it. Talk a little bit about hiring. What's the number one hiring mistake small businesses make, and how can they fix it?
Not fully vetting the people they hire, especially in that early phase when you're potentially bringing on a partner or someone who's going to take on an executive role. I made the mistake of hiring a friend because I needed someone that I could trust. And We had a very long standing friendship. And that worked out really poorly because I did not fully vet this person for their qualifications, their competencies, their motivation, their previous experience. And so when I brought on my next business partner, I knew that going into it and made sure, she had what I needed to help the business succeed and grow. So just making sure you're really clear on exactly the person you need to hire. What are those key knowledge, skills, personality, experience, background that you need from that individual, and being crystal clear of what their role looks like moving forward. So I made the mistake of just assuming my first business partner was just gonna, know what to do every day and be able to just kind of go off and run with it the way I did as the solopreneur. And that just wasn't the case. And so having a lot of clarity and transparency around what the person's supposed to do after you, of course, vet them really well for the role itself.
Yeah, like that. What are a couple interview questions that you should ask that can help you kind of get that good employee?
So there's two evidence-based types of interview questions that I've found to predict future job performance. The first is situational. So tell me about a time when you did key function of the role, right? Tell me about a time when you managed a vendor that wasn't responding. Tell me about a time where you wrote a proposal and you revised the proposal to better meet the prospective client's needs, right? So those situational questions tell me about what you've done in the past. And then there's also more forward, future oriented questions. So it's more hypothetical. So here's a situation that's likely to happen on the job. What would you do? And so that way you're getting at what have they done in the past, but also how would they respond and act in these likely scenarios that they're going to come across in the business.
Excellent. Are there a couple of questions you think are outdated that people still ask every day?
I don't know how often they're being asked still, but like those questions, I think Google was doing it for a while. Like, how many golf balls would it take to fill Dodger Stadium, right? And I know it's to assess critical thinking and quick math, but it's not relevant to the job. There's never going to be a time working at Google that you're going to be filling Dodger Stadium with golf balls, right? And so really, as I said, understanding what the job is, doing a job analysis, understand what those key knowledge, skills, behaviors are to the role, and asking questions directly related to the job itself is really important.
No, I agree. Talk a little bit about, roles change, workforce has changed. So what does research say about remote work and productivity? And are business owners wrong to fear it?
So remote work is not the solution. The solution that employers should be embracing is flexible work, because some people genuinely do better productivity wise working from home. Others do generally better working from the office or working from the office like 2 or 3 days a week, right? So they get to have that interaction with the team, they get out of the house, they have that experience, but then they can come home and do heads down work for those other 2 or 3 days a week, right? And so giving that flexibility, and if that flexibility is in place, how do we make sure that those working from home don't unintentionally get left behind? So if Susan's going in the office 5 days a week, Susan's getting far more face time with senior leaders, executives, and people just might assume, well, Susan's here, so I'm going to think of her first whenever a promotion opportunity comes up. But Susan might not be the most equipped person for that promotion. Maybe the most equipped person is Dave, who works from home 4 or 5 days a week. But people don't think about Dave because he's not physically in the office. So how can you make sure, if you have a flexible working culture, that you have the mechanisms in place to allow for true hybrid interactions? So a silly example is I was the only remote person on my team that was based in New York for my last corporate job that I had. And I bought with my own money the team a lazy Susan So during team meetings, they could turn the laptop that I was on to the person that was actually talking so I could see them. Now there's like smart rooms that there's cameras all over the room and they can zoom in on, the people talking. And so we're getting there from a technology standpoint, but there's a certain intention and consideration, especially that leaders need to have to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table, even if they're tapping in remotely.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. What does the science say about multitasking? Is it killing productivity?
Multitasking is not good for productivity. Having our brain switch gears and not stay hyper focused on the one task at hand, you actually are getting a lot less accomplished as opposed to working on one task at a time. So the research shows multitasking is not beneficial to productivity. You should really block your time to say, I'm going to work on this report for this hour and these emails for that hour, rather than switching back and forth. And if you think about it, like your brain is going to be in one mode working on one type of task, and then you're going to switch it quickly to get into another mode to work on a different type of task. Like think about it in regard to like uh, clothing and physical activity, right? So like I'm going to want to do all of my professional stuff in the morning so I can look professional and have my makeup on and have my professional outfit on. And then I'll do my errands and my exercise and stuff later in the day so I can have my sweatpants on and my gym clothes on, right? And so if you were switching up all throughout the day, going from professional to casual, how much time would you have wasted getting changed and reacclimated? You want to focus on one thing, block, the similar work on that thing. Also, knowing what time of day you're most likely to be in flow, knowing what time of day that your brain is working best so you can do your most highly cognitive task at that time. Like I know for myself, morning hours are so critical for my heads down work. So when I wrote my book, I wrote it in the morning, right? And then I did more meetings and things in the afternoon. My brain wasn't quite firing as many cylinders as it does in the morning. So knowing that about yourself, I feel like tech has done a good job with software developers and not having the rigid 9 to 5 schedule, because a lot of software developers get their best work done at night. So it's okay if they roll in at noon if they're working to 8, 9, 10 at night. So having that, once again, that flexibility, but really trying to do your best to not multitask, because the research shows that it does not increase our productivity, even though it feels like it, right? We feel like if we're working on 5 or 10 things at a time, like, oh, I'm being so productive, but you're not. You're disillusioning yourself.
Yeah. 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 How can small businesses use psychology to retain their top employees?
Use psychology. So thinking about what people need from a job, right? So you need role clarity. So what am I expected to do? What's the path to success in this role? Needing meaning and purpose. We want to be a part of something that's bigger than us and understand what our role is in that bigger, machine. People want connectedness. They want to feel like they belong in an organization and they have, peers. They're a part of a community. Um, People also need their basic needs met, right? So right now, especially, in our country, we do not have living wages, right? And so organizations that properly pay their employees a living wage, they're going to be able to keep them around for so much longer, because at the end of the day, we're working for money, right? And we need to make sure that we're able to pay our bills and take care of ourselves and our families. So just thinking about what are these basic human needs and how can we make sure as leaders that we are meeting all of them, right? Not just a couple, not just a few.
Yeah. What's the biggest myth about team building?
That it can happen after one team meeting. Then it can happen right away. So we're getting together as a team. We have our annual team meeting, right? We're gonna do team building exercises, and then we're gonna be this cohesive, kumbaya team after that. And that's just not the case. Team building requires building trust, and trust takes a long time to build, right? And so we need to make sure that we're giving opportunities for different people to work together, to build trust with one another, to communicate with one another. It's a long process, it's an ongoing process, and it never stops, right? It should always be a leader's responsibility to make sure that there is a cohesive, well-working team, and when not, to address it and fix those issues so we don't ruin the culture moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. I know some of the organizations I work for, it was let's get together once a year and do team building exercises. Let's stand behind your partner and you fall into their arms, and I used to always just laugh. I'm like, okay. This one time is not building trust throughout the year for sure. So I agree with you. If you can fix one thing about how most companies treat people, what would that be?
There's such variability with how companies treat people, so it's hard to say. I think it really depends on the company. But I think as an organizational psychologist, I talk about the work that I do and how I was trained was very similar to how those in a business school are trained. We talk about a lot of the same concepts: leadership, retention, hiring, selection. The difference is those from a business background are looking at all those factors from the bottom line perspective, whereas organizational psychologists are looking at it from a human-centered perspective. So my answer would be organizations need to take a more human-centric approach, especially in the times that we're in now with AI and technology, really understanding, what's unique about this organization or about the jobs within this organization that can only be done by humans. And how do I structure that job in a way to make sure I'm taking that human-centered approach, that my people feel well taken care of, that they know what they're doing, because I'm designing the organization around the human experience, not just around the bottom line. And the correct way to do it is both, right? We can't just have happy people in a poorly functioning organization. You still need profits, you still need to keep the lights on. And so by taking both a human-centric approach while also monitoring the bottom line, that's the way to go.
Very good. What is one challenge our listener community could help you solve?
So I have a new book out called Act Like an Ally, Work with an Ally. And I'm really trying to bring back the term ally into the workplace. And I define an ally as someone who uses their power, status, privilege to help and support someone from an underrepresented or marginalized group. But there's another side to allyship. There's also the person working with the ally, the individual who benefits from allyship. And so for those listening, I'm just so ready and excited to bring this message to organizations, to associations, to institutions, to share the message of my book and really start bringing the term ally back and bringing this concept of allyship into organizations in a way that diversity, equity, inclusion fell short. I feel like a lot of the issues that DEI has been facing over the last year is a result of not including everyone in that DEI conversation, whereas allyship really pulls everyone in because everyone has a role to play, whether you're the ally, you're the person working with the ally. We all have a opportunity to work together to make a fair, more inclusive workplace. So anything that can help me amplify this message, I'm really excited to get it out there.
Yeah, excellent. I know I threw a lot at you the first half of the show, but I honestly knew you'd be up to the task. I know from some of our previous conversations that you have extensive knowledge in your field, and I want to be able to give the listeners a lot of some good answers, at least to start with. So I appreciate that for sure. But the first half we learned from you, as I just said. The second half would love to learn more about you. So take me back in time, little Victoria. Did you know you'd be running and growing a company?
Absolutely not. So I always knew I wanted to be a psychologist. Throughout high school and my first few years of college, I thought I was going to be more of a counseling, clinical psychologist. I had this vision I was going to move to LA and be a a psychologist to the stars, right? And have, take care of celebrities and whatnot. But then I realized my junior year of college that I didn't have it in me to be able to draw those boundaries between work and my home life. So for example, having patients that having, clients that are suffering, that are struggling, I couldn't turn that off whenever it was time to go home at the end of the day. And so I realized that line of psychology was not the, right route for me. And then I discovered organizational psychology after I had graduated with my undergrad degree in psychology and communications. And I was actually bartending, and two organizational psychologists walk into my bar, and I asked them, what they're doing, what brings them to town. And they explained to me that they're working with a current standing hospital to help figure out how they can retain their nurses and doctors because a fancy new hospital was opening up down the street. And I said, let me get this straight. So you got hired to figure out how to make the lives of the employees better. And like everyone's on board with this. This is like a career. Like sign me up, because we spend so many of our working out of our waking hours at work. So if I can do my part in making the experience at work just a little bit better, that has such scale and such potential impact. So that's really what drew me to the field. Never thought I'd be running my own business. I did work in a number of consulting firms before I started my own business. I did burn out at my last corporate job. And when it was time to go back on the market, people were like, oh, you're so entrepreneurial, which I didn't really understand what that meant because I never started my own business before. I'm a psychologist first, not, a business leader, but I figured I'd give it a shot and see how it goes. So can I get a client? Can I get a second client? Can I make X amount of revenue by this date? And I kept hitting these little mini milestones. And then that was in August of 2019. And then I really went all in January of 2020, bought the domain, got the logo, did all the fancy stuff. And then I built it during COVID, which was wild. And then also during COVID, what George Floyd got murdered, and that really, changed the entire landscape of DEI and workplace inclusion. So I've really been riding a roller coaster ever since starting this. But, between the 100+ clients we've served, the impact of our book that we've released, Inclusalytics, my new book out now, knowing that I have been able to make an impact on the workplace, and when it comes to workplace inclusion, DEI, allyship, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yes. Excellent. Where do you see yourself and your company in the next 3 to 5 years? I know you just mentioned your book, but where do you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I have pivoted away from consulting, and I've pivoted more into keynotes, and authoring books. So in 3 to 5 years, I might have a third book out. I hope to have spoken at hundreds of organizations and associations and institutions. I really want to scale my message, my body of work through keynotes, through authoring. And so just continuing to be a thought leader in the space and giving people, especially people internally at organizations, the tools they need to foster workplace inclusion and allyship.
I love it. I love it. If you can go back in time and meet yourself the day you founded your company, what advice would you give yourself now?
Be careful who you bring into your organization. Going back to the point I shared before, vet anyone you bring into your organization. Make sure they have the correct knowledge, skills, abilities to do the work. I wouldn't say don't work with friends, because there could be friends that do bring all the skills to the table and do a great job, right? But I made the mistake of valuing friendship over competency, and I would absolutely do that differently if I had another chance.
Yeah, understood. What do you do outside of work for fun?
I sing. So I was in a band before COVID, but we haven't been able to get it back up and running since COVID times. So mostly just karaoke nowadays. I also have a 10-year-old, so it's been really fun raising him here in Pittsburgh, because I'm from Pittsburgh as well. And so, during the summertime, we go a lot of bike rides. We check out all the music festivals, all the great culture Pittsburgh has to offer. I also love going out to eat. My husband's a chef. And so we try to try new restaurants and, really enjoy the culinary scene in Pittsburgh here as well.
Yes, I love Pittsburgh. And I did not know about the singer. So that's something I definitely learned about you. Very good. I'll have to one day come hear you sing for sure. If clients want to connect with you, what's the best ways to connect with you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is going to mattinglysolutions.com. There's a contact us page, so you can either fill out the contact us form, or you can just schedule an appointment with me directly. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so Victoria Mattingly on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me on there, shoot me a DM. I love meeting new people and growing my network, especially here in Pittsburgh.
Very good. So I want to thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for all your knowledge. Like I said, I know I threw a lot at you, but I knew you were up to the task, and I knew you can help a lot of people in a very short period of time. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want to thank the audience. If you learned something today or laughed, please tell somebody about this podcast. Again, Dr. Victoria, thanks so much for your time. This has been another exciting episode of Steel City Growth. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Steel City Growth. Thanks for joining us. For show notes and more, visit steelcitygrowth.live. Steel City Growth is proudly sponsored by Murphy Business of Pittsburgh, offering expert guidance in buying, selling, and valuing businesses to help you achieve your goals. Until next time.